John Singer Sargent, Secrets of Composition and Design. A Rainbow Cloud production by Jason Mark Ulster. John Singer Sargent, Self-Portrait, 1906. How does an artist see the world? You see things that way, pointing slightly to the left, and I see them this way, pointing slightly to the right. What is beauty? Is it an objective reality or something only held in the eye of the beholder? Sargent liked Plato's definition of beauty, the splendor of the truth. As a young student, Sargent studied art in Paris under Carlos Duran. With Duran, Sargent studied the alla prima wet-on-wet method for oil painting, where layers of wet paint are quickly applied to previous layers of wet paint before it dries. Sargent also took lessons with another portrait painter, Léon Bonnat. Duran, Bonnat, and Sargent were all influenced by leading Spanish portrait artist Diego Velázquez. Velázquez is known for Las Meninas, the maids of honor of the Spanish royal court. The work's complex and enigmatic composition has baffled and entranced viewers. The spatial ambiguities, multiple focal points, and visual interactions convey a dance between illusion and reality. Velázquez is himself in the painting. Sargent painted a copy of Las Meninas in 1879, and in 1882 painted his own interpretation in The Daughters of Edward Darley Boit. The Daughters of Edward Darley Boit, on display at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The painting baffled critics. They wondered why the children are so isolated from each other. One critic called it four corners and a void. Why is there a void? Early on in his career, Sargent won awards and recognition. Fishing for Oysters at Cancale, 1878. Another version, Oyster Gatherers of Cancale, was awarded honorable mention at the 1878 Paris Salon. The painting's naturalism, marine tidal pool reflections, silvery hue, and sparkling lights were admired. Expatriate author and friend Henry James wrote, Sargent offered the slightly uncanny spectacle of a talent which on the very threshold of its career has nothing more to learn. Throughout his career, critics thought that many of Sargent's paintings have shown a detachment from emotional content. Cara Burch is not smiling but brooding. Was she bored? The painting was not considered a success at the time. Why did Sargent paint her this way? Sargent was known to say, I do not judge, I only chronicle. I don't dig beneath the surface for things that don't appear before my own eyes. Sort of like what you see is what you get. Robert Louis Stevenson and his wife, 1885. Critics thought the composition strange and unflattering. Stevenson is depicted fidgeting. Sargent thought it captured the author's way in intense thought. Stevenson thought the painting queer but witty. I'm at one extreme corner. My wife, in this wild dress and looking like a ghost, is at the extreme other end. Madame X, Madame Pierre Gautreau, the risque low right shoulder strap version. Although Madame X was Sargent's personal favorite, it brought Sargent controversy and critique. He kept it hanging in his studio. The painting was both disliked and admired. The powdered bluish skin coloring, strange pose, low shoulder strap, a captivating persona was the talk of the town. Sargent adjusted the right shoulder strap afterwards. Shown in the studio photo with Madame X is his painting, The Breakfast Table. His sister, Miss Violet Sargent, poses. Sargent's paintings are alluring for portraying the animated reality of his subjects. But are the images real or contrived from Sargent's own viewpoint and imagination? Sargent's critics also felt that while his art was brilliant, he compromised himself with wasting his talents on the rich and famous of his time. Was Sargent misunderstood? Does Sargent himself have a hand in this? Sargent did not keep a notebook explaining his methods. Maybe this was intentional. Was he keeping his techniques confidential? A mystery around a painting makes its subjects eternal. Was that one of Sargent's objectives? Sargent admired Dutch portrait painter Frans Hals, who painted with bold brush strokes and a colorful palette. Frans Hals also did not leave a journal. My first impression of Sargent's works is that each painting holds a veiled design to be discovered and enjoyed. Let the artists in paintings reveal themselves. An artist endeavors to control the attention of those viewing their work. Let's examine the devices for directing the viewer's attention to a composition. The concept of unity of design proposes that elements of composition can't stand when divided. Through unity, a viewer should first recognize the whole and then see the sum of the parts making that whole. Every part of the composition must belong together and not be arbitrarily placed on the page. Some techniques to control attention to the point of interest. Brightness attracts the viewer to a point of interest. All else is less detailed. Darken the painting's corners to accentuate the figure. In Cara Burch, Sargent used design contrasts as in the asymmetric lengths of hair and particles of clothing. Darker areas around the head and body contrast with the lighter face and clothes and traps the eyes from escaping the portrait. Sargent regularly applied the rule of three to give visual interest and convey harmony and balance. Omne trium perfectum. Every set of three is complete. 5 objects, an odd number grouping is also used. Notice that the subtle but skillful asymmetries in shapes, color, direction, line all lend interest to the subject. In pictorial composition, a challenge is to unify a single unit within its four-sided frame enclosure and maintain a sense of stability. Tying the vertical figure by connecting line lends stability, like docking a boat in water. In many Sargent portraits, the head is just touching the rim of the chair, which in turn touches the frame. Contrasts, asymmetries, brightness, negative and analogous shapes, and rule of three all draw attention to the subject. Flora Priestley, 1889. Analogous shapes in the person, clothes, and pose stimulate thought. Gesture relays behavior. Notice the variety of hand gestures in Sargent's portraits, each unique. A color wheel from the time of Sargent. A color scheme uses colors that are appealing together and create an aesthetic feeling. The reflected blues, reds, and greens complement each other. Repose, 1911. Sargent uses analogous shapes and parallels to create harmony, zigzags, and angles for contrasting flow. A line is used to connect the figure to the frame. While the figure is off-center to the left, the flowing dress parallels the length of the couch to the right. The S-shaped curve, the line of beauty, proposed by William Hogarth, signifies liveliness and excites the attention of the viewer. Sargent uses the S-shaped curve or serpentine lines in many of his works. Both of Sargent's parents helped Sargent develop his art at an early age. His mother was an amateur artist, and his father, an eye surgeon, knew medical illustration. Schooled at home, we know that Sargent's mother was most encouraging of his artistic abilities. However, I surmise that Sargent might have learned something about optical laws and visual perception from his father. The Impressionists were interested in optical realism and the optical sensations of light and color. They embraced scientific discoveries in optics and color theory. Did Sargent apply optical laws in his paintings? Were any of his methods unique? Was Sargent a misunderstood genius, leaving a mystery to be unraveled? Was Sargent ahead of his time? Can the future laws of optical perception and Gestalt be applied to Sargent's works? Gestalt effect. The whole is other than the sum of the parts. Gestalt theory describes how the mind organizes visual data. Gestalt theory refers to the mind's ability to visually organize forms and shapes into a unified whole, instead of them being just a collection of lines and curves. Let's now look at some of Sargent's paintings and apply the rules and techniques we discussed, defining the Gestalt laws along the way. Notice the handheld gestures and positions for Robert Louis and his wife. We have him and her parallel positions. Dynamic diagonals create movement and lead the eyes through the painting. The law of similarity can be applied here. Things that are similar are perceived to be more related than things that are dissimilar. Although Robert Louis is apart from his wife, he is still connected to her through similar parallel body positions. Singer uses parallel lines leading to a void through the door where the viewer may quietly leave the painting or come back. The dotted highlights on the banister are guides in the void and use the rule of 3. The law of closure, or in the Stevenson's painting, unclosure. Things are grouped together if they seem to complete some entity. Notice the open picture frames, the cut-off furniture, the separation between the Stevensons, the void. Our perception fills in the visual gaps and supplies the missing pieces so the painting appears unified. Through unclosure, Sargent invites us to supply and complete parts of the painting. You feel part of the display. Playing both the contrarian and the modern artist, Sargent used contrast as well as a variety of leading lines in the composition. Vertical, horizontal, and diagonal lines, analogous shapes, and using an uncentered composition lends for an active portrayal fitting Mr. Stevenson's composure. The Misses Vickers is an example of the law of continuity and the law of proximity. Elements arranged on a continual line or curve are perceived to be more related. Things that are close to one another are perceived to be more related than things that are spaced farther apart. While two of the ladies are grouped together by a circular shape, the third, out of the circle, is connected by her hands pointing to the chair. Notice the analogous shape of the choker and the similar color of the red velvet. This connects the outer Miss Vickers to the inner two, who themselves, while having contrasting colored dresses, are unified by an embracing touch. Also notice the rule of three demonstrated by the grouping of three hands into two groups for the three ladies, instead of having a pair of hands positioned together for each of the ladies. In Dinner Table at Night, we have a beautiful example of Sargent grouping objects in threes and fives. Note the three picture frames on one side of the lady, with another two on the other side, in effect framing her. The three lamps, placed apart, have different shapes and illuminations, but are similar in their red color. They are perceived as grouped together. Other groupings of three are the flasks, red flowers, and pearls. Note the small light bluish knob on the drawer at left highlights the darker colors and reflects color to the lady's right shoulder. Grouping the three lamps and two human heads together on a line would be a balance for the five pictures, unifying the seemingly busy composition. The partial side male figure to the right would be a Steelyard-type counterweight balancing for the lady placed frontally in the center of the composition, causing a teeter-totter effect. Only a portion of the man's hand can be seen with a trail of smoke rising. Blocked from view by a lamp, our mind fills in the gaps and tells us he is holding a dinner cigar. Sargent put his best into this painting, placing his career in jeopardy for it. It is not just another portrait, but a view into Sargent's artistic statement. Let's examine the composition using the design concepts mentioned. In Madame X, Sargent used the S-curved line of beauty, analogous shapes, and the rule of threes and fives. The vertical and symmetrical arms and parallel table legs suggest use of the law of symmetry and create a harmonious and balanced appearance. By using analogous shapes in both the inanimate objects and the figure, Sargent is unifying the painting in a relational way, following his own stylistic formulas. Most likely it is a stage posed or from his own imagination, a case of artistic license. The Daughters of Edward Darley Boit, a most mysterious and baffling painting, also known as Four Corners and a Void. Considered simultaneously traditional and modern, The disconnection between the daughters asks as to why anyone would commission such a painting. However, by using Gestalt theory and unity of design concepts, the mind can connect the disconnected and fill in the spaces. The daughters, seemingly separated, are skillfully interconnected with each other and the room by their analogous colors, shapes, poses, hairstyles, and contrasts, their individual personalities, and their commonality in being sisters are portrayed. Observe that the shape of the vase is also displayed in the negative space between the legs of Mary Louisa, the sister to our left. This sign immediately tells us that we are dealing with abstract shapes. The mind's eye now connects her with the vase and to the sister leaning on it, Florence, who is linked to Jane on the right by holding her hand. The analogous but asymmetric negative spaces of the Japanese vases bring interest to the painting. Using the law of closure, our mind completes the partial vase on our right and perceives it as being whole like the vase on the left. The larger negative shape for the right vase provides it a similar weight to the vase at left. Florence, leaning on the vase, is complemented by forming an S-contour line of beauty. Her stance in profile limits our view of her, furnishing a sense of mystique. Holding hands with Jane on the right is endearing. Julia, the smaller, younger daughter staring at us, is made prominent by being placed closest in the central front of the painting. The add-on doll increases her presence and puts her on par with the other sisters. Looking up, the doll unifies her with the above sisters as the red attire links her to Mary Louisa. Mary Louisa gains focus by having light reflect on her. Standing in front of the bare wall, Sargent positions her in her own rectangular frame outside the enclosure of the two vases. Jane is unique in that she is the only daughter that we can see both hands. Her hairstyle being similar to that of Mary Louisa links the two farthest sisters. One can imagine a circular composition, a triangular one, and an ellipse connecting the various shapes, objects, and figures together, with the daughters unifying the painting. Considering Sargent's fondness for groupings of odds, threes, and fives, Sargent had a challenge in painting four daughters even. By separating them on the canvas, they can then be rearranged into interchanging groups of three figures. By adding a doll or vase, the sisters can be grouped into fives, giving being to the inanimate figures. Parallel lines, strategically interspersed, act as speed bumps that slows down our gaze from leaving the painting. So too, the red curtain divider acts as a road bump. The window in the void lets our eyes escape the composition calmly, but then it leaves nowhere interesting and we return to the daughters. Quietly striking is the shadow of the vase's rim reflected on Jane's pinafore. For each gaze at the painting, another ingredient is revealed. Observe that the original Japanese blue and white vases standing next to the painting are more detailed. Sargent skillfully captures the essence with a less is more impressionism. In El Jaleo, Sargent has it all. He spent a year in planning, and it shows. Most inconspicuous is the use of the S-curve line to connect the heads of all the guitar players. The use of parallel lines, verticals, horizontals, diagonals, curves, colors, and shadows make for ruckus and excitement. Note the small orange light on the chair at left, balancing the orange dress at right. The painting uses similarity, symmetry, asymmetry, and continuity with elements arranged on differing leading lines. The focal point, foreground, and background are all interconnected in a common fate, the dance. In retrospect, it would be hard to agree with critics of Sargent's art, holding that Sargent lacks imagination, or that he is a painter okay, but rarely an artist. Sargent wanted to bring classical art into the modern world. Call his style neoclassical impressionism or Sargentism, however it is entertaining. No stranger to controversy, John Singer Sargent might have intended for his art to be mysterious. This set him apart and was good for business. Indeed, his subjects are everlasting. Each subject was treated as unique, and in no two paintings are the hands painted the same way.